Today, we're diving into a theory that is so radical, it suggests our entire understanding of history, the one you learned in school, is off. And not by a little bit. We're talking by more than 1,000 years.
I mean, really think about that for a second. What if the whole story of Western civilization, the Greeks, the Romans, the Dark Ages, what if it's all built on a phantom timeline? This isn't just a random thought. It's the very heart of a theory that wants to completely rewrite our past.
And here's the central claim, and it is a staggering one. The idea is that this massive chunk of time, over 1,300 years, was just artificially inserted into our calendar. And if that's true, it means that huge swaths of history and the events in them, well, they might not have happened at all. So, you have to ask, right? How could you ever prove something that big? Well, the answer isn't in old scrolls or books, because those can be faked. No, the proof, it's argued, is up in the sky. It's written in the predictable, unchangeable clockwork of the cosmos itself, specifically in ancient records of eclipses.
Okay, so here's the first major crack in the official story. You see, for a long time, historians have been kind of puzzled by the fact that many eclipses described in ancient texts just don't line up with the official dates for those events. With modern computers, we can pinpoint the exact day of any eclipse in history. And when we run the numbers, the dates from the history books, they're often just wrong.
So the solution being proposed here isn't to just throw out what ancient historians wrote. The idea is to trust that they did see what they said they saw. The problem isn't the event itself, it's the year we've attached to it. Because if you start shifting the timeline, all of a sudden that astronomical data, it clicks perfectly into place.
And this isn't just one simple fix. The theory says the timeline got twisted in different ways at different times. Babylonian and Greek history needs a huge jump forward. We're talking 1136 years. For early Roman history, it's a 781-year shift. And for the later Roman period, a 521-year correction. So what happens when we actually apply these shifts? Let's start with one of the biggest names in history, Alexander the Great. His name basically is the ancient world. But what if he wasn't ancient at all? Let's apply this new chronology to him and just see what happens.
Every single textbook says Alexander the Great was born in 356 BC. That date is an anchor for our entire understanding of that period. It's a cornerstone of what we call classical antiquity.
But remember that first big shift we mentioned, the one for Greek history? That was a correction of plus 1,136 years.
You do the math, and the result is absolutely stunning. Alexander the Great wasn't born in 356 BC. He was born in the year 781 AD. This one calculation just yanks him out of antiquity and drops him right into the middle of the Middle Ages.
And that year, 781, it isn't just random. In this new framework, it becomes a kind of historical Rosetta Stone. It happens to be the exact year the Georgian calendar begins. It's the magic number that makes all those Roman eclipse records line up. And get this. If you shift the start of the Greek Seleucid era by the same logic, you land in 825 AD, the exact year the Indian Malayalam calendar starts. Suddenly, all these calendars from totally different cultures seem to snap together into one coherent timeline.
Now, shifting the timeline doesn't just move famous people around. It also starts to suggest that some historical figures might be, well, phantoms. It points to this bizarre pattern of historical duplication, almost like names were just copied and pasted to fill out the centuries.
Just take a look at this pattern. The official history of Rome gives us these three emperors in the 4th century: Constantine, Constans, and Constantius. Okay, then just a little while later, in the 5th century, we get another Constantine, another Constans, and another Constantius. You have to admit that's a little suspicious. It's almost like a writer just ran out of names for their characters.
So let's zoom in on the most famous one, Constantine the Great. Officially, he's a 4th century guy. We apply that early Roman shift of plus 781 years, and suddenly his reign starts in 1087 AD. Now look at Constantine III from the 5th century. He gets the later Roman shift of plus 521 years, which puts his reign starting in 928 AD. The conclusion here is just incredible. Constantine III, the guy who supposedly came later,
actually lived and ruled before the man we call Constantine I.
And this reordering might actually solve one of history's great puzzles, the Arch of Constantine in Rome. See, art historians have always been scratching their heads because this so-called 4th century arch is famously covered in art stripped from the monuments of much earlier emperors. We're talking 200 years earlier. How is that even possible?
Well, with the new timeline, there's no paradox at all. It's simple. Constantine III, now ruling in the 10th century, would have been a direct contemporary of those other emperors. Of course he used their art. It wasn't an art history mystery. It was a timeline error.
Which brings us all the way back to the biggest question of all. If the timeline is this wrong, how did it happen? Why would anyone invent a phantom history and add a staggering 1,313 years to our past?
According to this theory, our whole concept of AD, or the Common Era, it wasn't originally based on the birth of Christ. The real year zero, it's argued, was a much older event, the Exodus from Egypt, when Moses received the law and the covenant with God was made.
So how was this phantom history supposedly created? The theory breaks it down into 4 main steps. First, it says the original, real history used the Exodus as year zero. Then, a new story of Jesus was created, and it was modeled on a real 11th century Byzantine emperor named Anastasios, whose name, by the way, means the resurrected. Third, and this is the critical move, this brand new story was deliberately backdated by over 1,300 years, creating a new year zero and inserting all that phantom time. And finally, to cover their tracks, the original Jesus figure from the Old Testament was renamed Joshua in later translations to hide the duplication.
So if we run with this, what does our past actually look like? Well, the most dramatic change, and it's a huge one, is that the Dark Ages completely disappear. They weren't a real period of history. They were a fiction, invented to fill the empty space on a manufactured timeline.
This is the story we all know, right? The Roman Empire falls in the 5th century. Europe gets plunged into this long period of decay we call the Dark Ages. And then, slowly, civilization reemerges in the High Middle Ages.
But in the new chronology, that whole picture is just wiped clean. The end of the Western Roman Empire doesn't happen in 476 AD, it happens in 1178 AD, a date that's confirmed by a recorded solar eclipse. And with that single shift, the gap just vanishes. There are no Dark Ages. The medieval kingdoms of Europe pop up seamlessly right out of the Roman era in the 13th century.
And the consequences just keep rippling forward. The Holy Roman Empire, for instance, doesn't even appear in texts until after 1254. And this implies that some of the most foundational figures, like Charlemagne, supposedly crowned in the year 800, are actually later inventions created in the 1500s and 1600s to give powerful families a prestigious but totally fictional ancient lineage.
So we end right where we started. This theory doesn't just ask us to rethink a few dates. It forces us to wonder if the entire structure of our shared past is a fabrication, and it leaves us with one final, really unsettling question. If our timeline is a construct, what other known facts about our history are actually fiction?